All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to trace the fascinating, chronologically mapped evolution of your psychology as your net worth scales from absolute zero to nearly $100 million. Most people think making money is just about the math, but as we break down these sources today, we're going to see that it's actually this massive, fundamental psychological transformation.
So picture this. You're 23 years old, it's almost midnight, and you're staring at your checking balance. Not your savings, your actual day-to-day balance. It's that number you constantly refresh on your phone while you're standing in the grocery store aisle, doing that frantic mental math to decide if you can afford the name brand olive oil or if you've got to put it back for the store brand.
Which brings us to part 1, the emotional reality of zero.
At this starting line, you absolutely aren't playing some high-level game of strategy. Money isn't a tool right now, it's literally the air you breathe. And the sheer panic of suffocating drives every single choice you make. Either you have enough or you're already drowning. You move $200 to your savings only to move it right back 3 days later. You're just running this low, constant hum of arithmetic underneath everything you do, strictly to survive.
And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway for this stage. At zero, your relationship with money is entirely emotional. Your decisions are being driven by anxiety, fear, and short-term survival. Those small wins you get, they feel huge, but they are incredibly fragile. It's a compounding cycle of stress. You get a tiny raise, you feel rich for an afternoon, and then, bam, your car needs $900 in brake pads. You're just trapped in this emotional loop.
Moving on to part 2, breaking the competence plateau.
Fast forward a little bit. You're 26. You've scraped together your first 10 grand. You're doing everything right. You're maxing out your 401k, keeping a solid emergency fund, avoiding lifestyle creep. You're doing exactly what society told you to do, until you run those projections 40 years into the future. And that right there is the competence plateau. You suddenly realize you've become excellent at surviving, but you haven't actually learned how to build. The projected outcome is fine, sure, but it definitely isn't the life you actually want.
Man, the moment you see this reality, you literally cannot unsee it. Recognizing that a salary is basically a ceiling dressed up as a floor is the exact catalyst that pushes you to start those side projects. It's what makes you quietly reinvest everything you make. And finally, understand what leverage actually means. You start seeing your time in a completely different way.
Part 3, the $500,000 shift.
So by 32, you cross that $150,000 mark, and your money kind of develops a personality. You start fiercely protecting your capital to build options, saying no to the destination weddings and the expensive group trips. But notice the fundamental shift in the actual mechanics of your wealth here. In the early stages, below $500,000, it's pure accumulation. You're trading your labor to buy assets. But as you cross that $500K threshold, your assets actually start buying other assets. Your capital begins to compound through deals, rollovers, and positioning completely without your physical labor. You eventually hit your first million, only to realize the milestone was never really the destination. It was just a proof of concept. But suddenly, around 2.3 million, this massive psychological shift happens. Money stops being a source of anxiety entirely. It just becomes a utility, exactly like time or attention.
Part 4, buying back your time. At this level, you aren't just rich in that flashy dinner party sense. You are wealthy because you have literally bought back your time. True freedom isn't the number in the account. It's taking a 3-week trip and absolutely not checking your email for 5 days of it. That level of total disconnection is a luxury you just cannot buy at the lower levels. Wealth becomes entirely about what that number allows you to completely ignore.
Think about how much this alters your daily reality. The whole texture of the game completely changes. You're firing wealth managers who talk way too much and actually know less than you do. You're throwing 800 grand into a deal specifically just to de-risk another one. You're patiently positioning your capital, and your only real goal is staying in the game longer than anyone else at the table.
Then, as you cross the 8-figure mark, your reality just completely fractures from the mainstream. You start walking into rooms where the real decisions get made. We're talking rooms with family offices managing hundreds of millions, private equity firms, and they actively want you sitting at their table.
Part 5, reputation as a financial instrument.
See, you aren't invited to these big tables as a courtesy. You're there because your pattern recognition is genuinely incredibly useful. At $10 million, your networks, your credibility, and your historical positioning, they open these massive doors that raw cash alone simply cannot unlock. Your reputation literally becomes a financial instrument, earning returns entirely independent of your daily, day-to-day decisions.
Now let's jump to the extreme end of the spectrum. You're 61 years old, net worth $94 million. You've got the dynasty trusts, the foundations. You probably haven't worked a conventional day in 9 years. You're operating at an altitude so isolated that your daily context is completely untranslatable to the people who knew you back at the beginning.
Part 6. Measuring reach, not worth. At this staggering altitude, you aren't thinking in financial quarters anymore. You're thinking in demographic shifts and infrastructure cycles. Power is totally compressed. It isn't about flashy volume. It's a 4-minute speaking window in a board meeting where 5 people hold enough combined capital to reshape a mid-sized economy. Above 50 million, your money entirely stops measuring your personal worth. Instead, it measures your impact, your scale, and honestly, a totally different form of responsibility.
Looking back at this whole journey, you can visually trace the widening gap between the person you were at the beginning, panicked at the grocery store over the price of olive oil, and the quiet architect of capital you had to become to reach the end. The psychological distance between those two people is just astronomical.
So, summarizing this explainer, these are the 4 essential psychological evolutions you need to survive this machine. And it really is a machine, one that relentlessly compounds the money and the identity of anyone who shows up patiently, consistently, and without flinching.
Because right now, somewhere out there in your city, there's a 24-year-old checking their banking app for the very first time. They're putting the good coffee back on the shelf. They're thinking their struggle is just a story about making more dollars, completely unaware of what this journey is actually going to cost them in sheer distance and internal transformation.
The wealth machine never stops to ask if you're ready or if the sacrifice is actually worth it. But as you sit here and reflect on the immense distance between survival and supreme leverage that we've unpacked today, I've got to leave you to answer that question for yourself. Is the trade worth it?